first chapter of AI video is going to be around using new fancy AI technology to do old media formats, as in linear video you watch from Adobe, right? Broadcasting. But of course, once you can generate video with code, you open up so many more new possibilities.
But eventually you create code. You're not entirely delegating video creation to the AI, you're assisting.
We very much believe in augmenting humans, putting the human at the center of all this, just net you the best content.
For starters, you have code that describes a video. So you have this sort of PowerPoint structure and that transforms into video. And then you have other helpers that, are more similar to our current world coding assistants. And I guess in that sense, when you're creating things of that nature, the user is co-creating.
Your kids are not going to be reading and writing. They're going to be watching and listening almost exclusively. Text is an amazing technology. The world is built on text. But the question is, if the friction to storing information, ideas, and knowledge in a video format versus a text format is as easy as that, right? Well, we will still be reading and writing.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the AI Native Dev. Today we have Victor Riparbelli with us on it. Victor, I've known Victor for maybe about 5 years now, or roughly that. And he's the CEO and co-founder of Synthesia, which is a super exciting company and the leading company today when it comes to AI native video. And we'll talk a lot about kind of creation with AI and decisions made along the journey, and also a little bit about the journey itself, which is really interesting in its own right, and apply, what type of learnings can we take from that to the world of dev. So Victor, thanks a lot for coming onto the show.
Of course, happy to be here.
So Victor, maybe just to get us started a little bit, tell us a little bit about what Synthesia is and what it does.
Sure. So Synthesia is the world's largest and leading platform for AI video for businesses. Essentially what we do is we help our customers land their messages with the highest degree of effectiveness, right? And the highest degree of understanding of whoever is on the other end of that message. And in 2025, that's not with slide decks or text, that is with video. Today, people want to watch and listen to their content. Everyone is different, of course. I'm sure you read a lot. I also still read a lot. But if you look at the average consumer, right, people really want to watch and listen. That's what they do in their free time when no one is watching. Listen to podcasts, watch TikTok videos, YouTube, Netflix, and so on and so forth. But when it comes to our work life, most of the content most of us consume is still in text format and it's in slide format. And we've essentially built a platform that kind of started with this avatar technology, which really was a way to replace a camera that you use in the real world with a sensor where you go around and you film things with AI. So we could generate the footage, if you will, of people talking specifically. But since then, we've now built an entire platform around it. So we have a video editor that enables you to actually finalize the video. You can add in your screen recordings, text animations, whole bunch of other things to actually finalize the video. It's a content management system. It's a publishing platform with our own proprietary video player. It essentially is one platform that helps you go from an idea all the way to delivering that video to end consumer and understanding how that is impacting them. One of the key things around our platform, which I'm sure we'll talk more about today, right, really is this aspect of enabling people who had never made a video before to make a video, right? And so when you enter the app today and you begin making a video, if you've ever made a PowerPoint in your life before, you should be able to pick it up in kind of 5 minutes. And that means that what we've essentially done is in some of the world's largest companies, we've created thousands of video creators who used to only be able to create documents and slides, but now they're making videos. That's kind of like where we are today. I think the next 12, 24 months, one of the things that's always been a huge part of our thesis is that the first sort of chapter of AI video is going to be around essentially using new fancy AI technology to do old media formats, as in linear video you watch from Adobe, right? Broadcasting. But of course, once you can generate video with code, you open up so many more new possibilities. Videos can be interactive, they can be two-way conversational, and they can do a whole bunch of other things we couldn't do with normal video, right? And so I think the next couple of years, that's really what's going to define the next chapter of Synthesia.
Yeah, no, super exciting, and we're going to drill a lot more because, like, each of these things is sort of a whole topic to unpack. Maybe so. I love how the platform has this ability for someone who hasn't created a video to create it today. I use it as the kind of really kind of a great example of how you can kind of disrupt the business world by really taking something in the world of AI that allows powerful creation, but requires a lot of change. A lot of it's an entirely different way of creating video. as compared to whatever, taking a camera and starting to shoot it. So I think that's really powerful, but it's also probably like a reasonably high friction type environment on it. So maybe first of all, like describe a little bit more like what is involved when someone does create a video in Synthesia. Like what is that experience, just for context? And then maybe let's talk a little bit about who's like the ideal creator in this context. Does it even matter if they have previous video creation skills?
I think there's so many, parallels to death, to code gen. So I think when you make a video, right, we tend to think a lot about like the production of the video, right, which is like technically how I can have each of the frames kind of created, right? Is it with a camera? Is it with AI? Mm-hmm. You sort of technically make the video. And that part, I think, we've made super easy, right? That's essentially you go in, you select an avatar, you type your script, you use this like basic PowerPoint editing functionality to put something together. Most people who are office workers, I think, should be proficient like figuring out how this works. That's not that difficult, especially if you compare it to like using Adobe Premiere, like some expert tool where most people would go in and just blank, right? They wouldn't know what to do.
Right. This is is it fair to sort of think about this as the storyboard, or the sort of like it's the script, it's the narrative, like whatever the chapters of the video that you would
it's kind of, if you think of a power, like making a slide deck, right? Like you have different scenes. You have the scripts, which what your avatar will say. We made a whole bunch of like design decisions around not giving you a timeline, for example, with your different layers in the video, because as soon as people see that, they begin to freak out. They don't know what a video is, right? So we intentionally kept it almost like PowerPoint with speaker notes and kind of relatively simplistic UX. We kind of, I would say, from a technical standpoint, most people can create a video, right? But the thing is that a video is not just the technical part of it. The video is also storytelling, right? It's how do we actually put together what is a good video, right? How long is a good video? What should you include in the video? What should you not include in the video? And I think what we found, generally speaking, right, is that that's actually the thing that people struggle with the most. By now, most of us know how to write a document. Like we know how to write an email, we know how to text with people. But video is a new format, right? You can't just like write a PowerPoint doc and then just copy paste that into Synthesia and make a video. That's not going to be a great video. In a video, you have a visual language that you want to use to communicate, right? You have animation, all these other things. So there's like the technical part of actually making the video, and then there's kind of more the creative aspect of like actually putting a good video together. And that's actually what people struggle with the more in Synthesia. So we built a bunch of tech to ease this, right? We've built what we call our assisted creation, which is essentially kind of like an agent that we've taught how to use the editor on your behalf. So what that could do is you can give it just a script you've just written kind of free form, but you can also take a URL, you can take a PowerPoint deck, you can take a PDF document, basically any existing content you have. They'll take it, they'll parse it, then it'll turn it into a video. So it'll write a script for you, it'll delineate it into different scenes, it'll also do the design of those different scenes. Some of those scenes may have a big image in it, and it'll pull images from stock stock providers. You'll use some of your own assets, and it gives you kind of like an outline. I would say from where it is today, it's not like a final video end-to-end good to go, but it essentially changes your role as someone who makes a video from like coming up with something from scratch to being an editor, right? The draft is maybe like 80% there, 85%. You still want to go around, change part of the design, you want to add something, you want to remove something. And it's been pretty interesting to see the progression of how many more people we can kind of bring on to be creators when you give them a draft to work from with their content, as opposed to asking them to come up with something from
That's
scratch.
awesome. If I kind of echo back a little bit of the pieces here, the first part is, okay, you use the sort of the lowest common denominator, or sort of the most. Also, I would sort of say maybe the core piece in which you want the human to decide, or sort of the creator to decide, which is what is it that you want to say, and I guess the storytelling piece and the video formation, or like how to tell that story in video format, is the part that, if you want to democratize it, then you need to help people. And so you assist in that. But you have also mentioned like another aspect. It's not like you can imagine that type of assistance happening as someone types, auto-completion or a little reviewer or something like that. And I think you even had, and have probably still some of those capabilities. But you're describing something that is more than that, which is just kind of point me at sources of information and I will help you form that. Are those just onboarding exercises of like, give me a PDF and I will create a thing, but now you will engage with something that is back into that format of, I've got the slides, like you just sort of pre-create the slides, but then from here on you work with the slide? Or are these actual kind of degrees of freedom where you're sort of leaving it to the LLM? Say, here's a PDF, like extract info from here, extract it from there, and maybe if you run it again, it would extract it a little bit.
It is like an entry point to making a video, which a lot of people use as like the starting point. It is just like an onboarding exercise. You can kind of tune. You basically, when you upload your content, you can tune the agent in like different ways, right? You can tell it how long do you want the video to be, what audience are you making it for, and it will kind of give you first an outline of the content, and then you can actually in bullet form. So it will give you like a bulleted, formatted list of like what narrative will be. And then from that, you can actually edit the bullet yourself. So you can add another bullet saying, add in something about blah, blah. You can take a bullet out. Then after the outline, which is sort of the easiest way for most people to sort of have an overview of like what's going to be this video. Then from there, it'll expand that into individual scenes, which is an actual video. And then you can, of course, edit that out, right? So it's less iterative than, say, like a completely free-form like texting where you just like keep prompting it over and over again, just spits out new versions. We do ask you to kind of like fine-tune it a little bit in the beginning to like what specifically that you're after. Obviously, this is like, this is like work in progress. And I think in all modalities right now, people are trying to figure out like what is the right degree of automation for different types of tasks, right? For example, I think if you're making a Super Bowl ad, which is not our target market at all, there I wouldn't expect automation to be a low degree of automation, right? Because this is a really important piece of content. Like of those 30 seconds, every second really, really, really matters. So you want that to be absolutely perfect. And that probably means you want to have a human being very much in charge of like every single pixel, right? On the other hand, making like a corporate training video and your main goal is to help people understand like, your vacation policy in your company or something like that, right? They will want a high degree of automation because it's a much kind of lower stakes piece of content. And we operate more in that category than we operate in the Super Bowl category. So what we're kind of figuring out is like, what's the right UX for people to get to that draft, but then also iterate on the draft after, right? We have a bunch of tools now. So, once you're in your video, you're editing it, you can, of course, use LLMs to kind of help you extend the scripts, make it some more happy, more sad, like do a whole bunch of things in there. But we very much believe in augmenting humans as opposed to like trying to kind of replace, like creating like a fully automatic content generation machine. I'm not saying that'll never happen. I think that's definitely the direction the world is moving in. But we very much believe that putting the human at the center of all this just nets you the best content, right? Like I think we've seen so many startups, both in our space, but also in other spaces the last 2 years who try to do completely like end-to-end one-shot generation of XYZ. And it's a cool demo, but very often, right, it just doesn't actually work if you want to use it in production, right? If you get a video that's kind of like 70% there, but it's not your brand's colors, it doesn't really speak about the product the way you thought it should speak about, then these things are just, they kind of remain like very cool demos, but don't have a lot of utility, right? I think that's one thing we've always been like obsessed about is really working backwards from like utility, which sounds very banal and obvious. But I think when we are these hype cycles, right, it can be easy to forget that sometimes.
Yeah, because it might introduce a bit more friction to sort of the initial creation versus just sort of saying a thing and creating it, which I think I'd love to draw some analogies to sort of the world of software development right now, which, feels fairly clear here. So you have, for starters, you have code that describes a video. So you have this sort of PowerPoint structure and that transforms into video. And that is, in that case, the sort of the text or whatever sort of guidance or configuration that you have about every slide or every one of those portions gets compiled, if you will, into kind of a video format. And then you have other helpers that, are more similar to our, current world coding assistants, in which you can text your way or autocomplete your way or such into creating it. And so that lowers the barrier because you might engage with the system with less video creation familiarity or less, even code familiarity. I think in that world, it's a little bit easier because even after you do all that process, eventually you get words. So everybody can engage, with that sort of text that describes what will be said. But still, you might not have video familiarity. So you have more of those interactive, LLM-powered, like tap the intelligence that is built into the system to be able to create the narrative. And I guess both of those are like avenues for improvement. But eventually you create code. So you're not hiding, or you're not entirely delegating video creation to the AI. You're assisting.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one of the things that was always very important to us, right, is you could approach video generation as kind of like a completely end-to-end task, right? Like you put in text, and on the other end you get out pixels, basically, which is how a lot of the like the very generalized video generation models work. Like if you look at like VO3, for example, or Runway PK, that approach certainly has like a lot of great things about it. But we always knew that for our customers and for our workflows, right, we needed to have an intermediate layer of editability, right? So, for example, in kind of our videos are composed of the avatar models, right, which produces pixels and footage, essentially, like you would get it off a camera. And then you have all the other elements of the video, which would be, you have like a lower third, like I'm having right here, right? That's the piece of text on screen. There's some animations. There's a transition to the next scene, which wipes out everything and fades in. Like there's all these things that makes a video, right? And we were always of the opinion that we need to actually build that as like representations we can control ourselves, right? So that you can just simply move a shape around the screen. You can change the text, whatever. If you had to prompt that into the video, right, that clearly just doesn't work. So what we did was we said, okay, we have the footage and we have the editor, and we invested a lot in the editor. That's a really, that's a pretty hard piece of software to build well, because the craft really matters of like what it's like to use an editor, right? If you think about
how do you sort of convey all of these desires?
And it's like building Figma, Pitch, like all these kind of creator tools, right? That's actually it's pretty hard building a great product here, but you need that, because if you have that, everything is fully editable, right? And that's great, because then you can start to help people again. Like you can prompt something, and if they can edit everything after the fact, then it's great, right? But we've seen some products like there's like slide deck generators and video generators that try to do everything end to end, and when things aren't editable, and you just have to keep reprompting and reprompting and reprompting, it works for some use cases. Like if you're using some of these general video models to clip clips from music video or B-roll footage for an ad or something like that, then it's probably okay, right? Because you're not trying, you just need a 10-second clip or something. And what you want there is like a lot of creativity in the model, the ability to just like, throw in 40 different prompts, get 40 different outputs, and just pick the one that you like. But for the use case, the real targeting, it's very different, right? Like here, people don't want to prompt 5 times to get a video that actually works, right? Because it's like a volume game. People are creating lots of videos, be able to edit everything after the fact. And so when we think about automation, the important thing about automation was always that the automation, whatever the agent spits out, right, is something you as a user can sit down, can correct yourself and edit. And that also gives us a great signal in terms of like, what's the agent good at and what's the agent less good at, right? So that kind of data that we start to collect there is actually pretty interesting. It's almost like RLHF data in some way.
Yeah, in what people edit. So I love that. And I guess that implies a certain level of determinism between, taking those instructions. I don't want to say that text because it's more than text, but that representation of the video that you have in every scene, every slide in the deck, and creating it. I guess, how do you think about kind of, the room for creativity or like the degrees of freedom that you want to leave the LLM? I'm certain that if you take the same description that you've sort of written today and you generate, or something that you've created a year ago and you've generated a video from it, that video is not going to be the same one that probably gets generated if you kind of run the same thing today, a year later, just by virtue of the system getting better, right? The platform improving. I guess, how do you envision today and tomorrow this kind of determinism versus kind of freedom to evolve on the LLM side?
Yeah. So there's like 2 components of this. There's one. The first one is like the actual video models that think of those as like generating the footage, right, that would come off camera. And then the other part of it is kind of like the video editing, which again is like all the lower thirds, the shapes, the animations, the transitions, all this stuff that fire. These are like today the 2 kind of distinct things. The 2 different models, right? The first one replaces the camera, essentially, gives you a footage of someone talking to the camera. And the other one takes that footage and edits it into something that is a coherent video end to end, right? The first one on the avatars, the thing that's unique about, and I think the way when you look at like the AI video model market, there's a bunch of different ways you can approach AI video. And of course, it is, again, super use case dependent, right? So if you really try and cook it really try and like distill it down, I think the two main and most important dimensions of AI video models are creativity and controllability. So creativity is a bit, as we said before, right? How creative can the model get? And creative models are super fun, right? It's like when you use DALL-E, Sora, BO3, whatever. You can type in literally anything in the model and something will come up, right? You can have dogs skateboarding on the beach. You can have an elephant walking around the room. You can have all these amazing things, right? And that's super important if you're creating creative content, storytelling content, meme content, viral content, whatever. Then that creative dimension is incredibly important, right? On the other hand, you have controllability. Controllability is, in our case, for example, does the avatar look exactly the same every time you make a video, right? Or does it change slightly depending on the prompt? Like maybe sometimes you'll have a beard, maybe sometimes you won't have a beard. Does it say exactly what you put in the script? Can you even actually decide what the person says? How fast is it to run? There's all these things that are essentially around like controlling out, right? How deterministic is it? Does it work every single time? Are we in the kind of slot machine world of using big video models where you just put something and you hope something gets out? And here, there's a very clear distinction of like what people are focusing on. We're very clearly focused on controllability, reliability, costs, ease of use, right? Our avatars need to look exactly the same every single time. They need to say exactly what you put in the script box and all this stuff. And then there's other models that start this creativity. Of course, we're moving towards more creativity in our models. The new flagship models we're releasing soon, they'll have, you'll be able to like prompt yourself into new environments, prompt new avatars. We're taking some of that magic, but it's all kind of built around this idea of like controllable models because that's what our users need, right? On the other hand, you have the other models who are built around the creativity sort of idea, right? This is where you get more your creative directors, like agencies, etc., right? Who don't mind like prompting something 50 times to get to the right scene, because if you have to prompt something 50 times, it's still 100,000 times more affordable than actually going on
shooting 50 scenes or even shooting one scene. Yeah,
shooting an elephant on the moon in a studio somewhere, right?
Yeah.
But of course, everyone wants to have controllable models that are also very creative. And so I think what we'll see is that eventually, probably most of all AI video will converge on like a model at some point, and the different products will be kind of rooted in the same models, but the use cases will kind of determine what the products look like, and the UX will be the thing that differentiates different products, right? On the LLM side of like actually taking that footage and then putting it into videos, that is essentially a task of like generating creating a model, right, that understands like our editor, that can move shapes around, write text, etc. And the main vector of improvement here is just like, can we teach a model to go from today it's more kind of templatized, right? So the way it works, sort of like you write the scripts, of course, like you LLMs to do that. And then based on the scripts, we try and figure out like, okay, what kind of design, which is basically like a whole bunch of templates.
What's the sentiment? Do you sound angry? Do you sound sort of laughing?
But this is more like around like, should it be like a process diagram, or should it be like a big picture or something like that, right? And then the model will figure out, like, okay, from this scene, I think it makes the most sense to have like 3 bullet points. Or I think it makes the most sense to have like a big image here or a process diagram, something like that. And that works pretty well, actually, like, because ultimately when you're making like simple videos, that can be, it's a bit like, think of how like, you have like 150 PowerPoint templates, and the model sort of picks which one works the best for your go-to-market slide, which one works the best for your product vision slide, and so on, right? And it fills those in with your brand colors, your fonts, and a whole bunch of other things that makes it look real. The thing we're working on now, right, is though, how do you go, the way you kind of go above that is you actually teach a model the language of video, right? How could you do that? Well, you could have a model that watches a lot of video and tries to figure out, not just like what kind of template should I pick in, but like what should this video actually look like? What does great editing look like, right? Well, that's something with like, you'll zoom a little, you're talking, the camera kind of slightly zooms in and animation pops up on the screen. This is much harder, of course, but obviously this is going to be possible, right? Like I'm sure if you sat a model down and watched like a lot of videos, and we have a whole bank of videos ourselves that just make for us, right? Can we learn to, instead of just using kind of a templated approach to like taking you from that, idea to a video, to actually just learning what does your brand look like? What does your font look like? What is the language of video like? For example, if you look at modern video, people cut every 8 seconds, right? It's like this very like ADHD way of like making videos, but people like, so the model could probably learn to automatically cut that do a side angle, do a straight on angle, to like for cool animations. This is like, definitely more in the kind of like research phase at the moment. But if you imagine that you, at some point, right, you will have models that can spit out content and footage that looks as good as Hollywood films and is as controllable. You can maintain the identity, you can do really whatever you want it to do. And to have a model that understands the language of video, right? Then you can combine the footage you can generate with the kind of video like with the world's best video editor that can take that and turn it into something. And I think that's the path for that's the two main vectors of kind of how you get to kind of Steven Spielberg as one AI product.
Yeah. Of creating. I love a lot of these, a lot of this sort of analogy, and I think actually I might be sort of a little bit, when all you have is a hammer, you sort of everything looks like a nail. But I think of it a lot as being spec centric. Like you are defining to a level of specification what is it that is in the video. And I think what you've built in Synthesia is you've built a mechanism that allows a fairly substantial level of control, probably as compared to code, still low level of control, right? You still don't say, hey, increase or sort of raise the corner of the mouth by sort of whatever, 2 centimeters. At this point, you're actually still allowing a decent amount of interpretability to the model, because it's just kind of unfeasible to describe the video at that level of granularity. So as compared to code, is probably still already has some built-in degrees of freedom, but still you control it substantially. But then the other side of that is adaptability, because I think you talk about creativity, and that's great, but and I agree with that. But that in turn enables adaptability, so that if you were to generate a video 10 years ago, or for whatever, like 40-year-olds like me, and you might go easy on the ADHD and sort of allow a moment for sort of scenes to change. While if you're sort of doing it for a teenager, you might be much more sort of snappy in the modification. So the same video can be generated in a way that is adaptable to that context. Right? And I think a lot about that in the context of code, because code has its own stacks. Like sometimes it's financial needs. Sometimes it comes back again to sort of user needs and sort of preference. And do people want to get a clean page or a rich page? Do you want it corporate looking, or do you want it modern looking? And even in the functionality, right? Do you want to optimize for latency? Do you want to optimize for costs? Do you want to use a specific stacks? All of those are different contexts, right? And you will adapt the code to that. But you need that spec that allows you to control that sort of slider between predictability and adaptability. And I think you're using the better words for the world of video, which is controllability and creativity. But am I on track here in terms of describing?
It's essentially all the kind of knobs you can tune, right? And different knobs will work different. Like different people, different users will have different needs. As I said, I do think all these things eventually will convert, but it's kind of a matter of like what's your wedge into the market and how do you position yourself. The exciting thing, as to your point here, right, is of course that, and I kind of also said that a bit in the intro, I think is, I think we're right at the brink of, I think right now, like video and AI video look very similar, right? It's basically just like how it was produced. That's different, but that's going to change pretty dramatically, right? As to your point, right, what we're going to be able to do when every video is generated with code and there's no sensors involved, everything is literally just like zeros and ones, then we can start to make an entirely new type of video experience where like maybe you don't like the ADHD experience of like TikTok cutting like every 8 seconds. That like should really annoy you if you have to watch a video that's built like that. Mm-hmm. You can just not watch it like that. You'll get a version of the video that is maybe a bit, more kind of slow paced. It's not as like TikTok-y, but then maybe like, your daughter or someone else who's like younger than you prefers to watch that style of information. They can do that, right? There's a lot of parallels. The one I usually use is like, when the first websites kind of were conceived back in the day, they kind of looked like newspapers on screens to some extent, because that was kind of like what we imagined back then, right? That's like the most obvious thing to do because everyone knows what a newspaper is. It's a page with some information. So let's just replicate that on our screens. And of course, that was a great product. And I think that's kind of like where we are right now in AI video. But then eventually, like we figured out, well, actually kind of a website, a newspaper are two very different things, right? A newspaper, like you print it every single morning, you send it out to 10 million people, they all read exactly the same thing. On a website, you can update the information in real time, right? You can have a feed that's personalized to whoever is actually watching it. You can drive interactivity between users. With one click, you can access a gazillion pages on the internet, and all the other things that makes a website very different than a newspaper. Right? And so I think what will happen is these mediums will diverge. And I think what we think about as AI video right now, right, will eventually be that, right? It'll be more about a system that has been instructed by someone, like me, for example, a user, to communicate a message. And then the system can kind of figure out how itself, like, well, maybe Guy wants to deliver it this way, Victor wants to deliver it this way. That's both across languages, body languages, what avatar do we want to use, etc. But that's very clear the way all of this stuff is going to go, right? And that's always actually been the thing that excites me the most. I think in our space, there's going to be two main directions. It's going to be one direction, which is going to be the Hollywood film, entertainment thing. There's like so much to do there still of just like enabling someone great.
Yeah, just to sort of replicate the current status quo, or like, produce the thing that can be done today with sort of physical means, or digital, but production means, but in a much, much cheaper and sort of iterative way, but eventually producing the same type of like output.
Exactly. It's kind of like when people, use a computer to write a book, right? You write the book and you publish it. And of course, that's like, way easier than sitting with like a typewriter back in the day, or at some point carving it in stone or something like that. Like it's much, much easier and much, much faster and has a huge kind of value added to it. But if you're someone with a message, right? A lot of like young people they'll start a blog, or there'll be a blog and Twitter, right? That's like constantly evolving, and it's not really like the format of a book. It's something very different. And I think it's like, it is all these trends, like we see it with every time we invent new media technologies, this exact same thing happens. And that's about to happen for AI video as well. And that's definitely the direction we're more excited about. I think there'll be other companies will be focused on like, entertainment, fictional content, like video as we kind of know video today. What we're the most passionate about is like, how do we evolve video into something new, right? I think that's just both on a personal level. I think it's very, very exciting and fun to do, but I also think from kind of a business opportunity perspective, there's just so much value to be driven here. If you take training and education, which is something that's very close to our use cases today, when you can watch a video and you can ask the video a question, or the video can quiz you or examinate you on the content you've just consumed, change the content depending on what you're interested in, right? You may have a kid learning mathematics, and this particular kid loves football, right? So let's make all the examples that makes everything that you're learning about math is about football. That makes it more interesting. If I'm learning math, it would be about music, because that's the thing that I'm the most passionate about. If it's you, it's something else, right? Yeah. Just the societal value we can create with this kind of like personalized learning. It's essentially like everyone will have kind of a personalized tutor in somewhere, right? That's so exciting. And there's certain other examples, in the corporate world, in the business world, where a lot of value this will create is just going to be immense.
I love that, both kind of with the sort of the mission aspect of it, but also the technology and the kind of lens on creation. And I guess in that sense, when you're creating things of that nature, the user is co-creating with the platform, and you end up having sort of these three-way creation, whatever combo here, right? In which there's the original creator that scaffolded the system and defined, these things have to be there, and they are. They're set in stone. There's no degrees of freedom over here. Like, it would always be these brand colors. It would always be, these are the topics that need to be examined on, etc. Then you have the AI platform itself, or the sort of the Synthesia platform in this context, filling in the gaps and sort of implementing, simplifying creation and bringing it. And then you have the user kind of with whatever their inputs is. Maybe it is whatever the favorite step that interacts with the platform. So it's a new type of creation, not just delivery, but you need to enable the delivery of that. Otherwise, you're hindered.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, super excited. I've got like a million more sort of topics to sort of ask about the creation side. Maybe we'll come back to that. But I want to switch a little bit to talk about the journey of Synthesia, because it's just super interesting. So you started the company back in 2017, kind of the AI winter type period at the time. It wasn't like the best fundraising strategy to come and come up with AI. And today you're this sort of high flyer. I think you announced that you're over 100 million in ARR, and you grew there like massively fast, and that's incredible. But it didn't look like that in the early years of it. Can you tell us a little bit about just a bit of an abbreviated story of the early years?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think in many ways, I think we're a kind of a classical story of, looking like fools for 3 or 4 years. But then, eventually turned out that the kind of bet we made back in 2017, we found the company was right. But the very brief story is that I'm from Copenhagen, Denmark. Like, grew up there, did a bunch of things by myself, worked in the Danish startup ecosystem, knew that I wanted to build a company, knew I didn't want to build like accounting tools and kind of business process things. I love science fiction.
Did you say you haven't? You've sort of built something a bit more creative than that,
yeah. And back then I was like building like HR tools, stuff. And it was like I learned a lot from it, right? But I was just like, on a personal level, I love sci-fi, I love frontier tech, and I wanted to do something like that. So I moved to London and I spent a year trying to figure out like what I wanted to build. This was just when AR and VR were kind of like in kind of a hype cycle. So the Oculus had just came out, and everybody thought that by now we would definitely all be in VR headsets all the time. I love VR still to this day, but I kind of back then felt it's not really there yet. Like there's too many obstacles. It's out of my control to build a big company around it. But I met Professor Matthias Niesner, my co-founder today, who had also looked at VR, but he'd kind of looked at more of the content creation angle. And he'd done this paper called Face to Face, which really was the first time the world saw a neural network producing photorealistic video frames automatically. And this paper like made quite a big stir, and I saw it as well. And I just got obsessed with it. I felt like this is super early, and of course it barely worked. And we look back today, it doesn't look very impressive. But I just felt like something very magical here, right? This is going to change first how we create content, and then it's going to change content itself, as we've just discussed. And I just felt there were so many parallels. I love music. Music is my big passion when I'm not working, and especially electronic music. And I saw so many parallels to how we, by now, like a lot of years ago, we started to digitize how you make music, right? You can sample things. Right. You're having to use realism. You can build synthesizers. You can create sounds yourself out of nothing, right? And everything that brought to us in terms of like new music genres, democratization of access to music production, and so on. And it felt like, what's happening now is just that we're digitizing video, right? And there's so many analogies to all the creative music tools that we're using. So I got very obsessed with that idea.
Yeah. By the way, that I didn't clue into that analogy. That makes a lot of sense, which you've gone from whatever a physical guitar to being able to reproduce that sound on the computer as an analogy to you could produce a thing with a camera, and now you can generate that on screen. Yeah. So doing a good job. Just I love that analogy.
Yeah, I think there's actually so much of like my experience like tinkering around with these tools in my childhood that really it's one of the things that is like in the back of your head. You're not like consciously thinking about all the time, but understanding how you make content digitally, I think was definitely helpful. Anyway, we felt like, let's try and start a company around this. It took me a very long time to convince Matthias, because at this point in time, I was 25 years old. I had absolutely zero qualifications to start this company at all, but I was just obsessed with the idea. Yep. We managed to get kind of a team together. We're trying to raise some money. Totally impossible. Got turned down by like 80, 100 investors, something like that. Everybody just thought, the idea was kind of crazy, which it was. Like it was, you had to extrapolate a lot to see this actually panning out. But also at that point in time, especially in London here, like everybody wanted to fund like PhDs, right? Who would go out and they would hire like the best free PhD friends, and they would like go on some journey to create some big AI company. And some of those companies, I think our strength actually ended up becoming the fact that I'm not a PhD and that I'm a person, someone who thinks commercially, but people definitely didn't like that. At some point, my co-founder Stefan, he sends an email to Mark Cuban cold. We found this email in a leaked Sony hack, and he sent a very short email just saying, "Hey, we're building this thing. We think you'd fit very well. He understands technology, understands media." He replies within 3 minutes. Very interested. Sends a bunch of questions. We email with him for 10 hours nonstop. Never get on call with him. And he ends up investing $1 million which was the founding of the company. And the lesson there was that Mark had himself implemented the face-to-face paper at home with a tutor. We did not have to convince him at all that in 10 years' time you can make a Hollywood film with your laptop. He completely bought into that. He was essentially just evaluating the team, right? And I think that was if you're doing something crazy, you want to try and find someone who shares like your crazy vision of the future, because it's with VCs, right? It's so hard to convince them something they don't already believe. If it's not if it's not like part of the current dogma of like the tech community.
Yeah, and the VC world is very much you only need to find one, but sometimes you need to talk to so many. I mean,
Exactly.
The Mark Cuban email is like it's like a part of startup lore now. I've heard that story now being told, not by you, of people just sort of, in part is like they'll hold on sort of faith on it, and part just sort of the craze of it. But I guess what I don't know is like how many such emails like the ones. It's not that you sort of picked, hey, the one person we're going to email is Mark Cuban.
Yeah, we send. In the probably definitely in the hundreds, maybe even in the thousands, right? We were just desperately trying to find someone to
kind of help you get going on the journey.
And I think, looking back, like I understood why it was a difficult pitch. Like I was 25 years old, had no qualifications to start the company at all, at least on paper. It was a crazy idea. It wasn't clear what the real use case was, if the technology was even going to work. But I'm very grateful that, that Mark took the bet on us. And as it always is, right? Like raising money is like a milestone, but the real hard part began like after we got the money and we're like, okay, great. So no one believes in us. We have $1 million. What can we realistically like build and sell?
And this is what year is this? Like 2017, you started the company. When are we now?
This is 17. So we kind of we kind of in spirit. The idea originated in 16, but we raised the first money in October 2017. And I think kind of like what we essentially did when we found the company, we did what you're supposed to not do, which we bet on our technology, not on a specific use case or product, right? And so we had to kind of figure out, okay, what can we build backwards from? So we ended up on this idea of like AI dubbing, which is like you give us a real video, not a generated video. We'll translate that to a different language for you. But we'll not just replace the voiceover, we'll also reanimate the face so that it looks like you're actually speaking in like Spanish, Italian, whatever. And I think the issue we had there was like, makes a lot of sense. It's like you're an advertiser. And if you live in Europe, you've definitely seen like really bad dubbed ads, right? Where like the mouth is completely out of sync in the German versions. If we can kind of, for 10K or whatever, can fix that for you and all your ads look like they were shot natively in whatever language that you're putting in, that makes sense. If you're Netflix and you invest a lot of money creating content and you could take all those films, you can make them look like they were actually shot natively in German or French. That should have some kind of like economical, there's been economic opportunities there, right?
I love how this is a European pain point, or a pain point felt more in Europe on it. We had Matti on the from 11 Labs on the podcast as well, and they also a bunch of years later started in that pain. But I think there's just you feel it more closely when you live in a non-single language ecosystem compared to the US.
It gets very tricky because like the first two funding rounds were very, very, very difficult. Not just because of this, but it was definitely also a thing that like the American VC ecosystem didn't understand the pain, right? They kind of like, you could explain to I kind of guess that makes sense, but you haven't actually felt it firsthand. Or like, if you're a company and you're kind of trying to penetrate many different markets, it's actually really hard, right? And it's a big value proposition of the platform today, like it is for 11 Labs. But essentially that was the thesis. We built this thing. This is back when, this is like GANs were like the thing back then. The technology basically, it did work if you look straight at the camera without looking away. And we had 2 PhDs sitting for like 2 weeks to create a 30-second clip. So it was more kind of like a visual effects. We were all kind of like a visual effects, studio with a proprietary technology. And after having done it for a few years, we did $1 million in revenue or something like that, which is not terrible at our stage, right? It kept us alive. But it was very clear to us that, first of all, what we're building was a painkiller. It was a vitamin, not a painkiller. People thought it was like cool, but no one would like scream and yell if we disappeared the day after, right? We were not in control of the go-to-market because we were selling this to video professionals, like agencies, production companies, Hollywood studios. And we were such a small part of like, we did this very famous David Beckham ad, right? And obviously, 98% of the bulk of the work of making that ad was like, someone comes up with the idea that David Beckham should do this ad. Someone pitches it to David Beckham. Someone arranges it, films it, and then we were like the very small part at the end where we would translate it to different languages, right? So we were not in control of our go-to-market at all. Like we were basically at the whim of like all these agencies deciding to work with us. But more importantly, also just didn't scale. Like the economics just didn't make any sense. And so we kind of went back to the drawing board. We just went out and spoke to hundreds, maybe even thousands of people, try and understand like what is video? Why do people make video? Who's not making video but wants to make video? And I think that was one of the advantages we have of being like very young and being very naive, is that you can really approach a space with zero baggage, right? And what we discovered was there's all these people in the corporate world and like smaller companies, and they're contacting us because they think our technology does something it doesn't actually do, but they really are very intrigued by it, right? And we can tell these people, like, they're all telling us they want to make video, but they can't today. They don't have a camera. They don't have a user camera. They can't get budget from their boss. And they're all saying roughly the same thing. They're saying, like, I'm making all this text content and this slide deck content, and I know that no one reads it. And if they do, they forget everything immediately after. I want to make videos. I've tried to make videos and it works much better, but the scalability of video production is just not there. Right? Like it's so much of a pain to make videos. You can't edit them after. And so we spoke to these people and we figured out pretty quickly that these people are not trying to make Steven Spielberg films, right? They're generally making very simple video, like corporate video of like someone talking to the camera, interspersed with like a screen recording or someone showing you how to do something, picture of a product. It's very simple content, right? And of course, for us, it was like, well, that's actually pretty good, right? Because there's two things that are interesting here. First is the domain of video they want us to generate is much, much smaller. It's basically a person talking to the camera, right? And secondly, the quality threshold is much, much lower for these people. If you go to a Hollywood director or someone who owns a video agency, right, they will not use your AI tooling unless it looks exactly as good as the real thing. Because but that's the bar, right? For these people, the bar is not real video. The bar is a PowerPoint. So they're evaluating the outputs like very differently. And that was the thing that we kind of latched onto. We thought that was very interesting. And that got us to this idea of avatars, right? Which is that you create this sort of digital persona of yourself, or you take one of our off-the-shelf avatars, you just type in the script, and you magically get a video out. And then, we launched that. That started working really well. There's clearly, we hit something there. We built the editor around it so that you could finalize the videos yourself inside this sort of PowerPoint type of UX, build a collaboration platform, a content management system, a publishing, and how we figure out today. So I think it took us 3 or 4 years of like pain to really get to things that worked. But there was also one of those, I think it's a classical story of like, you'd rather be too early than too late, right? Like we managed
as long as it's arrived.
When the wave sort of hit us, we were just so well positioned, right? And we were years ahead of any of our competitors.
Amazing story from a journey perspective. Also, I think super instructional for the world of sort of software development today, because I think when you look at agentic creation today with software development and you look at the revolutions, I think that distinction about who is it for is so critical. You get such extremely sort of conflicting opinions from people about sort of coding assistants and about the vibe coding and those creations. And I think what people oftentimes overlook is there's a key distinction between someone says, hey, I could have written this code. In fact, I'm very good at it. And this is just about sort of optimization. So does it produce code that really thinks about all the different small details that I think about? And I'm amazing. And that's a very, very high bar. Clearly something you'd want very attended. But also you kind of start doubting, is it really producing value here, or am I just, babysitting more time than if I had written it? And then you've got people on the other side who are using whatever it is, Bolt or Base 44 or Lovable, and before they couldn't produce software, they couldn't create software, just like the user base you're talking about, which is they just couldn't create a video. So now you make it available. So like anything that is functional is already magic, is already something that was not available. It still needs to be good enough to be something that they will embrace. And I guess those worlds eventually converge, or they don't really converge. They become a gradients of the same domain, because I guess we also anticipate that eventually AI-powered creation will permeate the stack and all the way up to the quality. But there will still be different tools that you would need at different kind of a quality caliber and skill set orientation.
Sure. I think there's like the in our world we talk about like, is this like high stakes content or low stakes content, right? And I think it's like the same in the code dev world, where what I think is going to happen, right, is that we're going to see a lot of this like low stakes, like very personalized things. Like I make the to-do list app. I feel like everyone always have like, they think they have like the perfect recipe for to-do list app, right? And there's nothing out there that really suits exactly what you want. That's probably one of the things for like vibe coding it for someone like me who's not like I can sort of duct tape things together. That might be really cool for me, right? And maybe I'll also even pay like, I don't know, $5, $10 a month to just like run this somewhere without any kind of pains. But that's very different than me saying, hey, let's like vibe code a CRM system for Synthesia, right? Like that is such a high stakes environment where the quality of the software really matters, the security really matters. So it also feels like they'll just be, as to your point and what we talked about before, right? Mine is like Hollywood films, or like, corporate person just like creating product marketing content. And in your world, it's like, are you vibe coding a to-do list app for yourself, or something like small fun for your family, or maybe like an individual tool for your team that does like data transformation, or are you like building like a CRM system? And it feels to me, at least a lot of the conversation the last 2 years, people kind of conflate the two, or they think of it as one, right? And I think it's not one. Like it's two like very different use cases. And of course, there are many others. But I really think it's like where we've seen a lot of the new AI tools work well is actually delivering value isn't these kind of more like low stakes environments where you enable people who haven't been able to do it before to do something new. But in the kind of high stakes, no matter if you're building like enterprise CRM software or if you're making like Hollywood films, it's the tools are just like not there yet, right? But they obviously will be at some point.
I think maybe indeed let's sort of use this moment to talk a little bit about the people involved in creation here. And so I asked you before, whether video skill sets or video editing skill sets of today are relevant. And as I understood it, they're sort of like they're helpful in the kind of crafting of the visual storytelling. So like they're a little bit available, but you're mostly sort of making video accessible to people that are not requiring that skill. I guess, how do you, maybe two questions in one. One is like the response when you do engage with people that are maybe stretching kind of your tools capabilities that do come from some, like they're in charge of videos in the system. They do have some video editing capabilities, even if they're not the producers. How is kind of their response to it? And then maybe we kind of go from there a little bit to say, like, how do you see this playing out? Do you still see a place for a role for kind of expert video creators, or is this really meant to be like quite substantially offloaded from the world of jobs?
All right. So what we definitely see is that people with video experience are much, much better at creating Synthesia. They become power users much faster. They have a suite of tools they use depending on what they're doing, right? So obviously, they're not trying to create Super Bowl ads inside Synthesia, but they really appreciate the tool for its ease of use and for the speed at which they can kind of like churn out content, right? I think what sets them apart is there's like some degree of technical ability, like understanding how video works and like, how should you place things, etc. But really, I think it's a lot about something as esoteric as like taste, right? It's like, how do you make a video that catches your attention the first 10 seconds, right? That's not a science. That's kind of like an art, right? What avatar should you pick for this market? Like, well, how do you write a script that's like fun and engaging? How do you make sure the video is not like way too long or like way too short? All this is like taste, and that's stuff that's taste that you build because you spend a lot of time thinking about videos and making videos. And I don't think the more videos you make, of course, you'll get better at it also with Synthesia, but it's very clear to me that the people who understand the language of video, storytelling part, are much better at making videos. And I actually don't think that will go away. I think they'll remain true for like a very long time. The other end of the scale with like these kind of like new users, that's something that they had to learn, right? So we help them with toolings. We talk about this AI agent we have that can kind of, make content on behalf of you. We've come up with our kind of our own framework that we call FOCA for like, how do you take a message that was sort of delivered in text the first time, but then you want to make it into video? What are some good ground rules for like doing that? But I'm very much of the opinion that I think people with video skills, right, as of course, assuming that they kind of migrate onto this new tool stack, no matter if it's Synthesia, if it's like more creative tools.
So they don't resist it too much, yeah.
Exactly. They will be the best at doing this stuff. They will have to learn new skills, such as like, what does it mean when a video is not just like broadcasting? How do you personalize a video meaningfully to different people? Just like slot filling with like saying, hey guy, hey Victor, love Synthesia, love Tessl, etc. Like that's not going to cut it. What can you do that's creative and using LLMs and agents to kind of create this experience, right? Because there's so many open-ended questions there. I think video editors will be much better at doing that, at kind of evolving into that. For the casual users, it's more a journey of like getting them up to speed with this. And in designing the app, I love this design principle called the Maya, which is most advanced yet applicable, which essentially that you kind of have this sort of window, right, of like the things that are like too scary for people to do, and then there's things people like very familiar with, and you want to like figure out where can you sit in under this kind of spectrum, right, where you can. In our case, this is said many times now, we kind of anchored on PowerPoint users actually. So like, okay, make it 75% like PowerPoint, because that makes people feel familiar. But then we also push the boundaries of what you can do, right? Like there's some new functionalities you have to learn. And then slowly, as more and more people onboard, more and more people try Synthesia, we move that window, right? So I think in it probably in like 5 years time or something like that, maybe less. Probably the app will look very different than it does today. It won't be as anchored on PowerPoint, but we've taken the user base from something that we're familiar with to push it into something that's new and exciting. And it should almost, for the people who've been with us for a long time, feel so seamless that you don't really think about it. It's like all of a sudden now you're just making conversational videos that are interactive, that are personalized by default, and so on and so forth.
Right.
So I think both types of users are really, really, really important.
I think I love the Maya principle as well, and I think probably the best kind of example of that is the gestures on the smartphones, right? Where initially it's like, what's a gesture? And at some point there were some big changes where you can actually start being demanding there, and people want some form of like, funky way you would twist 3 fingers to sort of achieve some specific examples, and that might be okay. I think so. So with that evolution, I guess do you still see kind of, I guess, this remaining, the notion of like video creation? It sounds like you still see that as a craft, and it's just a different craft than it is today. What about the production? I guess sort of the person with a camera sort of shooting a video. Do you see that mostly disappearing? Take a longer timeline, right? 10 years out.
I do think that's probably like a more at risk for sure. But I would still say that something like video, I mean, I came to video having never done video before, right? So I learned everything from kind of starting company. I think it is one of those disciplines that when you get into the weeds of it, most people don't understand like how much work it actually takes to create like even a good looking corporate video if someone just talks to the camera. When you watch the video back on LinkedIn, it looks like, oh, whatever, someone put up their smartphone and hit play and said something. In reality, like there's, how does the light fall in, right? How does the camera move? What should the angle be? What should the framing be? Like there's all these kind of like stylistic decisions that you make. And of course, those are not usually made by camera operators, but there are like a degree of like also choices a camera operator has. So I would still say, I think a lot of these people are like, have a much better foundation for being the ones who pick up these AI tools and then become the experts. But I think it will require a migration of their skill set. And I definitely think that the job of like carrying a camera and filming things in the real world, that will probably be a less attractive business to be in 5 or 10 years time, right? Just like being a typewriter is also not a very cheap business to be in today. It's always very hard to, I think, predict exactly what's going to happen. And I actually don't think that like real video is going to die and all of a sudden everything is going to be generated. I think we'll put a lot of value on real video in some sense, just like we still like to see people playing piano or guitar or we listen to vinyl. Like there's an emotional part of it. And there's also something I think we just, as humans, we ascribe some value to that, right? We also still read physical books, despite the fact you could read everything on an ebook. So I don't think it's going to go away. I think it's going to coexist. But probably what is going to be more at risk is a lot of like the business content, where that's sort of per definition, there's less romanticism, nostalgia, creativity around it. So I think it is a market that will shrink, but I don't think it's going to like disappear completely.
Yeah, I love that sort of super succinct on it, and I love how you keep coming back to kind of, I guess, historical references of music here is a great analogy of what has happened there, and I do that for a bit. And I think clearly we kind of face that question in the world of software development of what will happen to software developers, and I think it's hard to predict the specificity, but like software development as a craft, hard to sort of see that going away or becoming any less important. Coding as a skill, as a sort of the means to doing it, probably changes or diminishes and maybe becomes a bit more the artisanal carpentry versus the factory line production example.
I think also one thing we see that we did an analysis recently of how people prompt like our AI agent to help them make videos, right? And I don't think it's a surprise, and I'm curious what you're seeing, but I'm pretty sure it's probably the same in software development, right? Which is just maybe an expression of like this idea of like taste. It's just like how good people are prompting these things, right? Like if you take someone who's never made a video before and you ask them to like prompt a video, describe what you want in the video, they're clueless most of the time, right? It's like, make me a video about our vacation policy. It's like, if you get someone who knows video and who's an expert on video, right? You get this beautiful prose. They clearly have a vision in their mind, like what they want and what they think the video should look like. And so they can help guide the system to actually create that for them, right? And I think that's the thing that's pretty hard to automate, right? Like we still can't go into brains and like kind of hijack internal LLM to like come up with the best idea for like how they should put something out in the real world. And if you give a very limited prompt, like that is what the system has to work with most. I mean, you can add a lot of context around it, right? But I think that's definitely something that's pretty interesting, right? Like you see this in kind of people's ability to prompt. That the more taste they have, the more experts they are, the much better at like prompting these systems. I have a lot of friends that are artists and illustrators, and like when I go in and try and use Midjourney, for example, I face the same problem. Right? I don't know what to write. I want like a picture in a jungle. When I have my friends an illustrator do this, right? It's like a 3-paragraph thing, and that's the images he generates is like 10 times cooler than whatever I can do.
Yeah. As well as their assessment of what gets created. And I think that's a really good spot. And I think in the world of software, that translates to kind of architectural and product skills, probably more. So they're still kind of elevated, I guess, kind of at a higher resolution that, use this library or write that line of code, much more about, the priorities and the bigger picture.
Sure.
So just, Victor, before again, so many more questions sort of still in my sort of queue to ask, but I think we're running out of time. Maybe just to move out of all of these and really talk a bit more society. You've had an interesting sort of statement in a TED Talk recently where you kind of made this bold claim where you think maybe even as a society, as video creation becomes easier, text will play a smaller and smaller role in our world and switch to video. I guess what's your prediction around the societal change that this type of sort of video generation will?
Yeah, so I had this very provocative one-liner, right, which is that your kids are not going to be reading and writing; they're going to be watching and listening almost exclusively, which definitely like set people off, which is also
it definitely gets people going. Yeah,
it's really going. It was also intention, right? But I think the core idea just is pretty simple. If you look at the history of media technology, right, it's very clear that we're always on this, kind of trajectory towards more visual content and more interactive content, which essentially is content or like information consumption that feels more like the real world, there's been a huge barrier to that historically speaking in the fact that like making a video, for example, is way more work in cost and, time, etc. and skill than it is to like write a document. So most of the things we've kind of been consuming has just been text. Text is an amazing technology. Text is sort of like a compression algorithm in some sense, right? Like we have something that happens to us in the real world and we can kind of like put that down and we can store that in a scalable way. And of course, the world is built on text. We couldn't have been there without text. But the question is, if the friction to storing information, ideas, or knowledge in a video format versus a text format, if it literally is as easy as that, right? What would that mean for text? Will it mean we will still be reading and writing? Or will it mean that we'll just default consume almost everything as visual or kind of like real life content, right? It's a freaky idea, but if you imagine that if you believe that AR and VR in 50 years or 100 years, the form factor will be so that we're just wearing a lens or something and we have screens at all times. I don't think it's a completely preposterous claim to say that we probably will be consuming most of the information as video and audio and in interactive formats. A lot of people have very strong feelings about that, and I kind of get that, right? I think we kind of really value reading in society. Mm-hmm. Like sit down with a book is it
probably represents a lot more than the reading. It represents the focused area, the kind of explicit attempt at learning or sort of immersing in a story.
But I think we have to ask ourselves the question, right? Of like, if you're learning something, I think few people would say, "Oh, we think it's better to sit down and like read a book than you're in a classroom with the world's best tutor who can talk to you and interact with you, and also has a whiteboard where they can show you relevant pictures or images or graphs or flow diagrams, whatever the thing you're learning, right? Like most people would probably agree that that's a better way of learning, and that's probably going to be possible in the not so distant future, right? And so I think it'll be interesting to see how all this stuff pans out, right? And of course, I'm being a bit tongue-in-cheek when I say that. I think there'll probably still be a use for text, like texting, etc. But I do think a majority of the way we consume information is going to move to being video-driven. And I kind of ended on this, I think, the thought that I have a lot, which is, it's so interesting how I put like so much moral value on reading books, including myself, right? I read less than I did 5 years ago for sure, because I've just found that often I'll buy a book on Amazon and it's 200 pages and I'll spend like a day reading it and feeling half the time reading and feeling like they're just rehashing the same examples over and over with so much filler in a lot of these books, right?
Right.
Which makes sense because you can't can't publish a book that's 50 pages long, right? You can't
sell it. Exactly. Or you can sell it for sort of any real amount. Yeah, you'd feel cheated. Yeah,
exactly. And so often I've just found like when I want to learn something new, right, I go on YouTube and I watch a 25-minute video, but I feel almost guilty for not reading the book and watching the YouTube video. And that's something that's just like, I think philosophically is kind of interesting. Like, why? That clearly, like if it's music or something, right? Obviously, much better to learn that in a YouTube video. We can hear something and see someone playing, as opposed to like sitting and like reading sheet music or reading a book. It's just it makes no sense to try and read music from a book, right? And I think there are a lot of cases like that. And then maybe the last thought I had on this was, I think there's always this sort of moral panic about like new technologies that's been consistent throughout all world history. And one of the things we're hearing a lot right now is that young people, they can't focus, the attention spans are decreasing, they just need like, quick dopamine hits from like TikTok videos. And maybe that's right, but I have this provocative idea, like what if young people are just becoming so good at consuming information because they consume at such high velocity all the time that they're actually just really bored by your 200-page book? We can't keep our attention because why would you? You can watch a YouTube video that's super dense, super interesting, it's exciting, it's communicated extremely well, and then now you're forced to sit and read this like 200-page book, which is not very exciting, right? So the question is like, are we getting better at consuming information, and that's kind of reflected in the content that we consume, or are we becoming lazier and our ADHD brains are just like taking over and we can't focus on anything? I don't have the answer, but I feel like that's an angle that's very rarely discussed, right? Like everyone always goes to kind of like the negative impact of saying like people can only watch like 30-second TikTok videos. And I thought that was kind of an interesting idea to try around with.
First of all, like I love that you're sort of challenging the conversation. I think like as long as you're sort of doing it to sort of facilitate a conversation versus, I don't think there was any like agenda in sort of, sharing this. It's more about sort of the narrative. And I initially was dismissive when I sort of saw this, like, oh, Victor's just being, just sort of, stirring some mess here. But then I did think about emojis, are actually like a good example, probably of a live example of something that literally is happening. People are switching to a visual, and I, even like an old person like me, sort of still sort of appreciates the sort of the value of conveying an emotion in that fashion versus sort of a bunch of words. And I guess the part that I am still kind of uncomfortable with is almost thinking about the degrees of freedom that we leave ourselves. And so I think the difference between watching a video or having someone illustrate to you versus reading a book is that it leaves room for imagination, right? When you read a book, then you actually get a lot less. It takes more time. But to an extent, you get a lot less information because there's only so much that can be described in the book, especially when you're talking about maybe in business books, it's a little bit different, but like in a storytelling type setting. And so it leaves you the degrees of freedom, that we're talking about leaving to the LLM. And I guess the question also is like, how do we balance those on it? But I agree with you that society will move towards kind of the path of least resistance, and what is sort of a means of sort of running and scale. So it's interesting to sort of see how things play out.
I totally agree. And I think the argument around your imagination, right, is the one that I met with the most often. And I think that's very true for sure. Yours in a video, you're generally like served everything and there's less, you have to do less imagining. But on the other hand, right, like a lot of that book could be consumed as like a podcast, for example, or like audio to get that imagination.
And that's an example of, like many people listening to this are doing precisely that. And, I'm a big audiobook fan. And so.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't have kids, right? But if I did, I'm also pretty sure I wouldn't be like, hey, guys, just stay on TikTok, just ditch the books. It's not that I'm kind of like, we will look back at this period in time and this evolution is very different as we are right now, because we always do, right? Like my favorite example of this is if you go back to like the 40s, when radios kind of became mainstream, something everyone had, right? The parents, you can find all these like old newspaper clips, right? Where parents are outraged that their kids are like sitting in their rooms and they're listening to these like cheap, low quality radio novels, right? They never leave their room. They don't want to go out. They just want to sit in their room and listen to these novels, which is exactly what people say about like TikTok videos or computer games, whatever today. And just in my childhood, I grew up obviously spending a ton of time on my computer, playing lots of computer games. I remember like this when I was, I guess was like around 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, something like that, right? And there was a very real fear that you become a school shooter if you play too much Counter-Strike, right? Or that you become like a violent person. There's famously a Senate hearing around Mortal Kombat, right? Like 2D Mortal Kombat, which people were outraged because they were convinced that this would create a generation of young, violent men that had learned to fight from like playing too much 2D Mortal Kombat. And it's like we look back at the stuff today, right? It just is absolutely like ridiculous. There's a kernel of truth to some of it for sure, but I'm very curious to see like in 30, 40, 50 years time when I'm going to be sitting scrolling TikTok in the retirement home, and I'm going to be like, I was right.
Yeah. At the time in which is no longer cool, but
exactly.
We'll see if that survives. Victor, this has been excellent. Thanks a lot for coming on the show. Congrats on the amazing journey, and looking forward to seeing it continue both society wise and as the business evolves.
Thanks, man.
Thanks for coming on. And thanks everybody for tuning in, and I hope you join us for the next one.